All right. Welcome back to the podcast. We are fortunate enough today to have Erik Crown, proven marketing expert guru with over 28 years of marketing experience just here in Baltimore, which means that we're all really old. So, Erik, thank you for being on the podcast,
Yeah,
and tell us a little bit about yourself.
sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Yeah, you said 28 years. I know it's over 20. I haven't done the math recently, but we'll go with that. Sure,
All right, I'm
28
not
sounds.
good at math, so
Yeah, I've been doing marketing locally for a long time. Started out my career at a company called Provident Bank, which no longer exists, but shout out to all my Provident Bank marketing people that are still out there. I really had a wide variety of experience across that time. Big brands, big companies, smaller companies, startups, and I've been in it long enough to remember before there was digital marketing and before there was all the things that we all consume ourselves with now. There was
mhm.
no SEO, there was no SEM, there was just brochures and ads in the newspaper. And man, now I'm really feeling old. But yeah, I think appropriate to this conversation is a lot of that time has been spent in the staffing and recruiting industry. I was with Allegiance Group for a while at some of their different operating companies. I think we're going to talk a little bit today about employer branding and employee value proposition
Yep.
and all that fun stuff. That's appropriate to the conversation is that's been right around 10 years in and out of that industry.
Okay. And before I get into some of the questions, Baltimore, all your life, have you ever wanted to go anywhere else?
Man, I was very fortunate to have some roles where I was able to travel and experience some different cities. And there's some other cities in the US that I love. San Francisco, Chicago, New York are great cities. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to London in one of my roles, and that's an awesome city. But Baltimore is my home and brings up a lot of nostalgia. And there's definitely a sentimental connection that will keep me here probably for the rest of my life. And warts and all, it's a great city, and I think it has a ton of potential. And so I love being here. And you and I definitely have a history in this area since we've known each other. Probably since we were in middle school, I think. But
We're not going anywhere, is what it appears.
right, I think so. I think that's right.
Let's just dive right into it. And I was going to ask you about current events, but specifically marketing and brands and what those brands and companies should be paying attention to, and maybe how to circumnavigate some of this craziness that's going on. The pandemic, land war in Eastern Europe, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, just some two small things happening, but other than that, not a lot to talk about. Yeah, so brands really they need to be paying attention to a few really big things happening that it really seem to be what everybody's talking about. And I really want to focus on a couple things in particular for this conversation. One is, like you said, this whole kind of what we see happening in the job market today with everything around return to office, the hybrid slash remote conversation and debate, which is right, which is wrong, and also how the job market itself really seems to be more of a job seekers market as opposed to a employers market. A lot of times we hear the real estate industry that it's a buyers or a sellers market. We can have the same thing in the job market. And so we seem to be in a period of time where the power is in a lot of cases in the hands of the seeker. And so it really brings a really interesting dynamic. And I think we see some things playing out like it seems to be that employees are feeling more empowered than ever to seek their own mental health and their own time with family and wellness and things like that, and actually prioritize those over their work. And there's also a big debate about is there really such a thing as life work balance, or is that even a conversation we should be having? Where with technology and with other trends that we see in the marketplace, in a lot of ways, our life and our work are the same thing. And if you're doing what you love, then that could be a healthy balance between the two. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things happening in the talent marketplace and definitely some things that brands should be paying attention to. And so the question I think that's appropriate for this talk is like, why do we say brands should pay attention to those things? In a lot of cases, we think of branding as a conversation around marketing and our external kind of messaging and reputation that we put out to the marketplace for doing business. But we really have to also be thinking about what is our brands to the talent that we're trying to attract,
Mhm.
and what is the messaging and what is the reputation that we want to put out there for people that we want to hire. And it's something that's been talked about for a long time, but I still see large companies, small companies, everything in between just not getting it right. They're not putting the amount of time, energy, and resources into building and sustaining a healthy employer brand as they are their external brands. And it's not too hard to see why that happens because the leadership of a lot of companies, on the surface, it's really easy to tie revenue to the external brand, right? Because it's all about marketing and getting leads in the door and turning those leads into revenue. And most companies measure their customer acquisition costs, their cost per lead, some of these key statistics that the marketing department is reporting up to management. And so management can say, okay, well, we're making this much revenue and we're paying this much to bring leads in the door and we're paying this much to acquire customers. And it's easy to figure those things out. Not enough companies are looking at employee acquisition costs.
Mhm.
What is it costing us to acquire an employee? And then what does it cost us to retain an employee versus having a high turnover of employees? So you start to hear a lot of the same language being used on the talent acquisition side as you do on the marketing side. But I really believe that things like employee acquisition costs should be statistics that not just the talent acquisition and the HR team should be paying attention to, but the marketing team should know those numbers as well. And they should be working together on the internal and the external brand.
So you're saying there's more to a company's workplace than just culture? No. That's the buzzword you always heard all the time, but clearly
Yeah,
there's a lot more that goes. The culture is very important, but
absolutely.
I think there's a lot more that goes into it. And you
Yeah,
basically just said that.
there absolutely is a lot more. And the mistake a lot of companies make, besides just what I mentioned earlier, besides just not putting enough attention or enough money towards building that internal brand, the other mistake that a lot of companies make is they look at it too much in a silo. Like they say, we can fix our talent attraction, talent retention problems if we just improve diversity and inclusion and equity, or if we just figure out our comp structure and maybe we need to improve that, or if we just figure out our benefits. It's all of that and more. It's culture as well. But that's another mistake they make, is they just think if we can just knock this thing out, we'll have the problem fixed. And it's a journey. It's not something you can just change by flicking a light switch.
Sure. And so do you think when you said that, it kind of hit a nerve, especially now, do you think it's even more important for companies to have a mission or to be guided by something we old people used to call it just having a heart, but not just today's generation generalized, but with people? Do you think it's more important than ever for companies to have a mission, or some of it can just be business as usual?
Right. Yeah. So I'm really glad you brought that up. It's a good segue into our next big, I think, current event that's happening that brands should be paying attention to. So along with all of the volatility in the job market and how things are changing, we look at things in the news like all these companies that are leaving Russia, right?
Right.
Because of everything that's going on in Eastern Europe and between Russia and Ukraine. And different companies that have a presence in Russia are handling that very differently. Some companies are very public about, we're pulling our operations out of Russia, we're leaving, we're not going to do business there. And some companies are saying we need to stay because, it's clear they've come up with a reason that they probably talked to their PR agency about. What about all the employees that we pay there? And what about, and the key takeaway there though for brands is that it's a conversation that's happening and it's something that people are paying attention to. One example is, I don't know if you saw this, but Burger King decided to stay and
Okay.
McDonald's just shut down all of their Russia stores. It's interesting to think about what went on behind the walls of those meeting rooms where one decided to stay and one decided to leave.
That's the
But
Whopper just taking over market share.
exactly. For brands to see that this is something that becomes so important and it's tied to such a huge current event that everyone's focused on, it goes back to your point. Like, people more than ever want to know that the company that they're doing business with has a mission and has a heart and cares about the same things they care about. People want to feel humanity in a brand. I know that sounds silly to some people, but it's true. You just see it. The data plays that out over and over again. And it's really closely related to what we talked about in the beginning. Companies want to know, buyers and people in the public want to know that their companies treat their employees well, because that is a very clear sign that that company truly has a heart and has a mission because they're treating their people well. And so that's all tied up and wrapped up in the employer brand.
Are there things that the leaders and companies can do, steps to make that happen? What we're talking about is more than just obviously the marketing team. It's the company. But what can those company leaders do besides, I guess I'll just say it this way. What can they do to show that their companies have a heart or that there's some humanity behind?
Yeah, I think the companies that do this right know that it starts with their current employees and having their finger on the pulse of how their current employees feel about things. If a company is going to try to move in a direction where they associate their brand with a mission, you can't just go out there and all of a sudden be like, hey, we care about this when you've never mentioned it before that day. So you have to start with very early steps. The earliest steps are surveying your employees. We see sophisticated marketing teams that are gauging customer experience all the time. They survey them and they research them, but people aren't doing that enough with their employees. So I think if you're going to start to move in that direction, you need to start to have those conversations first internally to talk to your employees about, we want to be more of a company with a mission. And it has to come from the top. That has to be something that's spoken from the highest leadership, because employees want to feel like this is something that the leadership really cares about. And then they have to spell out very clearly to the employees what the next steps are going to be. We're going to probably put together some kind of task force or committee that people can volunteer for. And then we're going to survey all of our employees to try to get a gauge on what people care about.
Right.
And maybe it's a couple different charities or nonprofits or some kind of movement or organization that they want to be closely related to. But that's the right step in the right direction. Once you have your employees on board and you have that internal advocacy and that connection between leadership and employees, then you can start to market that externally and show that you care about more than just one bottom line. And that's another thing that, we see more and more is companies presenting themselves as a double bottom line company, because companies want people to know that they care about more than just making money.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So we do a lot of internal surveys. We have happiness surveys and things like that, which, sound maybe a little odd or corny on the outside. But to your point, that's management, that's leadership's way of getting a read on the pulse of the employees in the company. And I think one of the really hard things is sometimes even when that's done, it's not a mandatory survey. If you don't want to take it, you don't take it. And
yeah,
it's not a catch-22, but messaging has to be very clear, I think, and maybe even more clear internally than marketing externally. So it's a fine line, and it's tough.
It is tough. And here's, I think at the end of the day, what's really toughest about it is when you decide as a company, you want to be a brand with a mission and you want to present yourselves as somebody who cares about your employees, has a clear value proposition for employees, and also has a mission as a brand. A lot of times that starts with a really hard look in the mirror. And, it's just like when you as a person choose to do that work for yourself.
Right.
If you say, I want to be a more authentic person and I want to be somebody who lives with a mission, sometimes that starts with taking a hard look in the mirror and saying, what am I today? What do I need to work on? And being honest with yourself. And companies have to do that too. That's the hard work that companies have to do. And sometimes they might see, you know what, we don't do enough work on the diversity and inclusion front, or we give some money to this charity, but we're not really truly showing that we care about their purpose. That's the beginning of the work, because once you do that, once the leadership looks in the mirror and the board and the VPs look in the mirror and say, this is what we want to be, and this is how far we are from that, this is the work that we have to do, then they can speak with real authenticity to the employees and then ultimately to their customers and say, hey, we're trying to get there, but we're not there yet. If people really feel vulnerability and authenticity in the brand, they're going to be customers for life. That's just, it's hard work, but it's work that needs to be done if you want to be a long-term successful company.
Who knew? Tie in some personal well-being and positivity and growth into the Fortune 500 world. I love it.
Yeah, man. There's a lot of, I love the word convergence. That's a big word for me right now. And there's a whole lot of convergence here. There's convergence between what we're doing externally as marketers and what we're doing internally as marketers. And then there's also convergence between what we're doing for ourselves as far as wellness is concerned and what we're doing as a company. There's a lot of overlap and similarities. And these are really important things for us to keep in mind as we take these steps. And like I said before, it's a journey. As soon as you think it's just something, hey, we're going to give $50,000 to United Way, or we're going to create this program that fizzles out in 2 months. Employees feel the inauthenticity in that, and they just roll their eyes the next time you try to do anything similar. So it has to start with the real hard work of, like I said, looking in the mirror as a company.
Yep. I think that's a perfect way to end this. All right, Erik, thank you very much. We appreciate it. I appreciate it. And we'll look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Scott. Always good to talk to you.
Thanks. Take care.
All right.